Hey, everybody. Before we begin the show, I wanted to give a shout out to our friends at POWERPOOL. POWERPOOL is a mining pool and is one of the most profitable for miners. So if you have one miner at home or a fleet of miners at scale, point your workers to POWERPOOL to enjoy the best payouts. POWERPOOL supports a number of algorithms, SHA-256 for Bitcoin, X11 for Dash, and others. And of course, we're focused and we care about the most, S-CRYPT for Litecoin, Dogecoin, and now Bell's Coin, merge mining. Pointing your workers to POWERPOOL is easy with its simple user interface, and the platform also has all the reporting available that your operation needs. Typically, POWERPOOL extends a low 1% pool fee. However, if you register with the 84 million link in the show notes, you will lock in a sub 1% pool fee, which is excellent. So start mining with the most profitable pool in 2024 and register for POWERPOOL with the link in the show notes. Cheers, happy mining. Hello and welcome to the 84 Million Podcast. This is episode 27, and we have as our guest, Why Litecoin. So Why Litecoin returns to the show after having been our fifth guest on the show. He's very active on X. He also publishes on markettruth.medium.com. He's a technical analyst and market observer with a background in finance and economics, also music. Why Litecoin champions the idea of Litecoin being the perfect Bitcoin substitute. And I know I personally referred to that on this show in the past. So anyway, sir, welcome back to the show for the first time since May 2023.
Yeah, appreciate it. It was really fun the first time, and I think we both have probably gotten better at this. And there's a lot that's happened in the past year, despite price kind of being at the same level. I want to say it was like around the same level back in May of 2023.
Yeah, it hasn't moved a whole lot. I mean, today, so it's interesting. We talked about this a few days ago, and then today we're recording on 11/14, and it seems like, at least in the X environment, we've seen a lot of, I don't know, some excitement happen with the new Litecoin intern. I'll leave it at that. And, we went from an environment of FUD just a few days ago where I was blocking people and just like, there's all these negative, it's like somebody flipped the switch on and there's all these negative comments and posts that we had to screen. And now today it's totally different. And I think we were up over 10% today. So X is an interesting ecosystem in terms of the application, and it's not exactly an accurate portrayal of the market, although there are important things that happen on that platform. But again, it's like we went from left to right in a matter of, like a day. So what's going on with this? Do you have any comments on that? Just how we were fighting over the weekend and now we're all excited and Lester's here?
I think it's hilarious. That this type of stuff happens, because I saw the same thing in comments and replies on my own posts as well as others. It makes sense because Bitcoin, rallied significantly, and then a lot of these other altcoins had huge moves in a day, somewhere up 10-20%. And so it's just the emotion of daily price movements that these people online get super emotional about, and I think they just forget to zoom out. Because historically, this is not a bad sign at all. Bitcoin typically rips really hard. And, the altcoins that had performed best in all prior cycles didn't rally until after Bitcoin all-time highs were broken. So to me, I just know this. And so it's not mentally frustrating at all. But for like the average person, I think, why is Litecoin not pumping all these others? It's kind of depressing.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think, again, if we're on X as a platform, it's just very extreme, and we see it. We can see the highs and the lows of things. But do you actually think it's a good metric to look at X posting? And again, I mean, the Litecoin account's a big account. I'm glad that we're kind of active again there. I think it's exciting and humorous to observe. I don't think it's a bad thing. But I mean, how important is X in the larger framework of, we've got LTCN as an instrument. We have a Litecoin ETF that was proposed just a few weeks ago. We have global users, right? It seems like a very inconsequential platform, despite that we're all on it.
Yeah, I would say it's depends on how you use it. We're all in our own kind of echo chambers and smaller X communities. And so you have to keep that in mind when you're reading about sentiment in comments and replies on X, like to your specific posts, and try to, I think it is helpful in some aspects if you can get a sense of like broader market sentiment, um, because sentiment does drive this market. And I did use it in the past, like successfully. I created the Shorting the Corn Bitcoin account where I was trying to take a short position in Bitcoin in November of 2021. And I was going around all the X spaces and looking at how many people were, in Bitcoin and what the majority of sentiment was. And at the time, everyone thought it was going to 100K and this was a new bull market. And so at extremes of sentiment, one way or the other, I think it can be pretty revealing, because if everyone's positioned long for higher prices and you don't have any new capital that's coming in, the easiest or path of least resistance for price is down, or the opposite's true. And I think the opposite's been true for Litecoin for a long time. The sentiment from the broader market has been extremely negative. I think outside of our own echo chamber on Twitter or X, if you read, because I have another account, and I read like what in general people think, and I think the broad vision for Litecoin or sentiment around it is that it's useless and that it doesn't have a value proposition. It's just a copy paste coin. It doesn't do anything new. Some people are like, oh, I thought it was dead. I can't even believe it's still around. But the reality, if you look at the data from on-chain analytics providers, is that it's, dominating these payment platforms. It's the most actively used blockchain out of all proof of work coins besides Bitcoin. And if you can read that data and understand it's actually not fake volume, right? You gotta like measure and determine if this volume is real or not. It's very easy to fake volume with a low cost chain. But from everything I've seen, that that data is representative of actually being the second most utilized proof of work chain. Spotting that divergence between sentiment and reality is where the opportunity kind of lies in, at least from my perspective, when you're speculating or investing. So I think it can be helpful if you try really hard to use it to get out of your own echo chamber and get a more broad perspective of where people are at in general, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And, I think we saw some of that today, that the echo chamber has expanded again on X, with Greg creating a meme, this Lester idea, and then having some other pretty big accounts. So we are seeing a larger rippling just with what happened today. And again, I think it's a good thing. I think it's interesting, but I also have to zoom out and say, this is just one platform, one day. Price isn't gonna, it's gonna have some, how do I say it? There's going to be ripples, of course, especially with larger accounts. But at the same time, this may have not done anything other than make us feel good. And by the way, I think that's legitimate, because I think we should feel good. I think I think you and I have been around for a little while, and we've produced content, and we've been in these spaces. You more spaces than me, but me doing the podcast and just kind of sticking around when even in the Litecoin community, I feel like the air has been sucked out of the room, or there's been people that have disappeared, or just, so I think it's good to feel good. I think we need to feel good more. And that's why I can say, hey, we had a pretty fun day today, and I hope it continues. And I think it will, by the way. I think it will. But I just was curious about your thought about just X as a platform and as an influence. How influential is it?
Yeah, it depends too. Like on the market, depending on the market cap of certain assets, like meme coins, I think it's pretty influential if it takes very low money to move those coins, because they're super low float. So meaning there's very low tradable coins. They're all held up by whoever launched it. And then if you can market it to people on X or YouTube, they'll pump a lot. So you see a lot of these coin promoters on YouTube and X like getting 90% success rates, because they're pumping these super small cap coins and they're just using their followers really as exit liquidity. So like, I know there's a few popular, I shouldn't name them by name, but there's a few guys I think everyone's aware of on X that do that. So again, yeah, it's like really dependent, but on an asset like Litecoin, it's so much larger. It's more liquid. I don't think this small Western meme did much. It may change sentiment, may get a few people to buy, but I think it's more of a coincidence. And the last thing I'll say on memes is online, when price is pumping, you will naturally see people meme about it. So there was this huge Dogecoin rally last cycle, and everyone equated it to being Elon, like memeing it. And yes, he had a lot of influence, but I think people just want to attach a narrative to price action. And Elon was tweeting about it years before it actually rose in prominence. So I don't know how you can equate that he was the primary driver of that coin going up a lot. I think it was relatively undervalued to its network activity at the time, and then was very illiquid because people gave up on it. People thought it was useless and nobody would ever use it or pump it. And then that's the moment where it, eventually demand overwhelms supply, and you get this positive feedback loop, and people are memeing about it, and Elon's huge. So probably, midway through or at the top, he had a lot of influence, but yeah, people tend to latch on to narratives because they have to try to make sense in their head for why something is pumping.
Here. Yeah. I think there's a lot of talk about narratives, and I think later I'd like to go maybe discuss that a little bit more. But that's an interesting point, how you mentioned he had tweeted and mentioned Doge prior to the gigantic rally, which, by the way, if you look at a chart, which I'll leave that to you to go over a little bit later in the show, things are looking really similar. If you look at that gigantic stretched out wedge between, for example, a Dogecoin and a Litecoin. So I think there's some things brewing right now in terms of what may be coming, and it may be coming sooner than later. But again, I'll leave you talk about that. I don't do that. That's not my scope. But I get you on here. I get you on here to talk about that. I want to maybe zoom out a little bit, and just say, we recently had a presidential election. Of course, Donald Trump took it. And he, of course, has become much more friendly to Bitcoin, especially showing up at Bitcoin Nashville this summer. He's got RFK with him, Tulsi with him. He's got Vivek with him now with this DOGE, Department of Government Accountability with Elon Musk. So he has changed his tune on cryptocurrencies, naming mostly Bitcoin, but cryptocurrencies, and he's got people around him that are very pro-crypto. So I think that's huge. So we'll call him a Bitcoiner. He's talking about strategic reserves in terms of the federal level. I saw Dennis Porter. He was our last guest on the show. He's doing things at the state level. He mentioned in a tweet today that Pennsylvania, as a state, 1 of 50, is also looking at potentially creating a Bitcoin reserve. These are interesting times we're living in with Bitcoin, and with the political powers, even the federal power, which we think is the kind of the highest, should be the most limited, but not sure if it's very much limited anymore. But the point is, we have the highest offices now talking about Bitcoin and doing things with Bitcoin. So we just broke an all-time high with Bitcoin. We were in the 90K zones. I think we're at 88 or something right now. I haven't checked. But we were in the 90s. We're getting close to knocking on that 100K level. But I don't feel that we're anywhere near a euphoria. What are your thoughts on this, just the changing political environment, that's influence on Bitcoin, and this idea that, we're going to hit 100K or 250 or whatever the number is? Where are we in Bitcoin land in terms of, I guess, the market or bull market or price action? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, this was kind of one of the craziest election cycles. And I made a video on this actually prior to the election. I thought the odds were extremely in favor of Trump, even though the polls and Polymarket didn't show that, months leading up to the election. So it wasn't that surprising. to me, I do think it's more bullish that Trump's in office for crypto in the short term, at least. But whether or not they implement a Bitcoin strategic reserve, I don't think it's going to affect the inevitable future bear market. I kind of worry that the U.S. government and maybe these other governments may buy the top, because I think from like a macroeconomic perspective, we're going to enter a recession, and because Bitcoin's so speculative, there's relative to its network activity, right? 95% plus probably are not using the chain or using it for intended purpose, such that if you do have like liquidity draining from all financial assets, that Bitcoin, historically has always affected the most. And I don't think the U.S. government buying it is going to change that. So I'm not bullish long term because they will buy it. My like market bias hasn't changed in that, once Bitcoin does reach these levels of 100K, and Bitcoin dominance starts to roll over, I don't think we're going to have, like another year long bull market. I'm thinking right now that we have like 3-4 months after this Bitcoin dominance starts to roll over, and altcoins start leading the way until we reach a market peak. But it is a similar setup to 2017 for sure, although 2017 lasted a year and topped December 2017, and I think this time it's going to be a bit faster. There's a lot of euphoria on the political side of Trump and crypto, people thinking that this will lead to a longer drawn out bull market. But despite Trump winning, and I think it's more bullish, and I'd actually think he has a better chance of doing what he said he would do, and it's probably more bullish overall for the economy. I think the problems they have and that have been building for decades aren't going to be able to be changed by Elon and Vivek and this Department of Government Efficiency, and really just Trump's overall ability to change the course dramatically, and like right away when he steps into office. I think that's like overhyped in a sense.
Noted. Because he's not even in office yet, right? This is anticipation, or maybe the feeling of the current guard waning into a new guard, right? So there's some maybe relief or respite. We could use different language for it. But my thing is, and I want to talk about 2017 versus 2024 specifically. In fact, that's the title of this episode. I think there's some really interesting similarities there. But, again, he's not in office yet. We're still under President Joe Biden in the United States, if we're going to talk about politics and presidents and things like that. So to say that 2024 is the new 2017, which maximalists have said, that means all of that has to be achieved by December. And he doesn't take office until January. So if that's the case, he really, other than an expectation of things to come, didn't even directly have power when things changed. So I'm curious if it would be maybe drawn into next year. You mentioned a peak. I don't know if you have a number, if that can even be arrived at. Of course, people throw numbers out all the time. I'm just curious, what would your peak look like for this cycle for Bitcoin, for example?
I think it's going to struggle and not get much beyond. I'd be surprised if we're at 200K. I think below $150,000. The reason I say that is primarily because of how many long-term holders you have that I know personally that held through 2017 and 2021 waiting for $100,000 price, like a six-figure price that will be selling. Looking at miner reserve stats on Bitcoin, I know a lot of those miners will also be selling off coins. And I think it's potentially like 20-30% of the Bitcoin supply held by those entities will sell. And just doing the rough math, like back of the napkin math, it'd take like $600 billion of inflows of new buying to support price at 100K if 20-30% of those long-term holders wanted to exit. So I just don't see how that much money is going to rotate into Bitcoin. And typically what you see happen with new money entering the space is, Bitcoin looks really expensive at $90,000 or $2 trillion market cap. I'm not going to buy that. I'm going to go buy altcoins that haven't run yet. And then you also have additional like fundamental limits on price, right? That I've talked about before, where Bitcoin has this monetization limit that could become apparent if Bitcoin fees spike, right? If it's $100 to transact on Bitcoin, it's like, well, I think the average person can see how am I going to use this to buy stuff? If it's supposed to be a money for me, it doesn't make sense to pay $100 transaction fee. So I think you'll have fundamental limits and then a lot of sell pressure such that it's going to be really hard for price to break much higher than $150,000.
So you're thinking 150, which is
I'd say
a decent
like
gap up to maybe, so 1 to 130. You mentioned 200 earlier. Would that be kind of your extreme outlier kind of expectation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm just curious.
It's hard with price targets. It depends on momentum and how crazy these bubbles get. I know with any type of parabolic rise, people tend to think it's over all the time and it keeps going. So there's a ton of money on the sidelines and money market accounts with interest rates potentially dropping and that capital having to seek yield somewhere else. You could see rotation in the crypto markets, and then stock market valuations are at all-time highs as well. I think you're going to see rotation out of those into the crypto sector as it catches global attention. But I just see it going into altcoins mainly, not Bitcoin.
So what sort of time frame would you think it would be? If, for example, Trump got in. If we're speaking, I want to talk about the political lens with you. I know it's a little bit skewed because there's a lot of moving factors, and Litecoin's going to do fine despite political powers. It's already been resilient, right? It's been around for 13 years, Bitcoin even longer. So they don't need governments to approve of them to do what they need to do or appreciate or whatever. But if we're going to use the common kind of, the administration's friendly, where is it going to allow the coin to go, or maybe expedite some NGU stuff? That's what I'm interested in discussing, because we don't really talk about that a lot on the show. And I think you're the person to go to for that. Would you think, again, it would be 2017 was 2016 and then into 2017? Would that be more like a 2024 into 2025 again versus 2024 now through December, which is what, a month and a half?
Yeah, I would say it's more like mid 2017 right now. If you just look at pure price structure, Bitcoin broke its all-time high in March of 2017, corrected. So I would say that was like the same as March of 2024 is when it broke the high, but we had an extended like 8-month correction and now just broke back above the highs. So that happened in April, May 2017, and there was only really like 6 months left of the bull market. So I'd say we're about there in terms of time and structure. Like the last 6 months of 2017 were absolutely crazy. And I think that's what we're heading into right now, as a lot of capital rotates into the crypto markets, it catches global attention again, and a lot of people taking Bitcoin profits rotate them into altcoins. But from like the political standpoint, yeah, the government's outside of maybe doing a strategic Bitcoin reserve, all the market really senses from this, I think, is clarity that Trump is not going to ban Bitcoin, which was a worry for the potential if Harris was elected. So I think the market feels safe in that sense. And so there's this, I think a lot of sideline capital was redeployed into the market from a sense of like, okay, it's safe to get exposure again to the crypto markets.
For sure. And again, he wasn't as friendly to Bitcoin when he was in office, but I know that the people in his office were very friendly. In fact, near the end of his term is when we were talking about banks starting to custody it and having talks with the Fidelities and things, if I'm not mistaken. But then, of course, it was regime change and nothing ever happened of it. And in fact, we got very cold. We got Gensler and all these other things that we've been kind of dealing with the past 4 years. So things are kind of put on pause, and I think maybe we feel like things have been put, play has been resumed. I'm hoping that's the case. As much as we're very libertarian and all sorts of political views, we cannot underestimate the power of governments. I mean, whether you like it or not, they're doing things. It's affecting things. They grossly manipulate markets, price mechanisms, all sorts of economics gets distorted based upon what they do. So we have to pay attention to regimes and how they, look at this technology, whether or not this technology could weather and outlast them despite their actions. I welcome the change. I'm optimistic. I hope there's no bait and switch. We've heard a lot of really good things from Trump at the Bitcoin convention, which kind of blew my mind. We've talked about those a little bit at the show, but so hopefully we're entering a new season. But speaking of 2017 versus 2024, that was when we had I want to say a $3 Litecoin, and it went up to about $3.90. So do you see that move repeating? Of course, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes, as they say. Would we have a more extreme move, a less extreme move? How are you looking at Litecoin in this sort of Bitcoin will appreciate, and then they'll roll out into Bitcoin into alts, and I would think Litecoin will benefit from that.
Yeah, I actually think Litecoin will benefit the most from that.
Yes.
What I would look at is 2017, as far as Litecoin goes, the real reason it succeeded, at least in my own hindsight analysis, is because it was one of the few assets you could actually buy on the popular exchanges. So people knew about it. You could buy Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin. And you had this crazy price run up where people were just buying these three coins indiscriminately, not really looking at fundamental demand or understanding what it was. They were just buying cryptocurrency in general, and all cryptocurrency prices went up as a result of that.
For sure.
Litecoin was a beneficiary. But you had limited reason, or at least outside of the speculative market, right? People actually needing these monies had little reason to adopt Litecoin back then, because Bitcoin had such a large lead in network effects, and it was basically free to use because blocks weren't full. So there was very limited real reason to transact on Litecoin. This code is almost identical. It didn't have Mimblewimble back then, didn't have privacy features. It had SegWit early, but Bitcoin implemented that too. So to me, it primarily succeeded on speculative demand. And so if you fast forward to 2024, okay, where are we at from 2017 versus 2024? Well, I think we had extremely high speculative demand, very low actual fundamental utility demand. And now in 2024, I think it's the exact opposite. I think speculative demand and sentiment is the lowest it's ever been at any point in Litecoin's history, while transactional demand is the highest it's ever been in history. And what's really telling to me is that generally in crypto overall, right, if you look at all the chains, they get increased usage and spending habits as the coin price goes up. So if you look at Ethereum, transactional volume on these payment processors worldwide, it's used when the price goes up because people own the coin, they want to spend it as they have profits. Same with Bitcoin, but with Litecoin, it's kind of an anomaly. People are using it more, not just on payment processors, but actually, running a node on Litecoin or paying for stuff with Litecoin peer-to-peer has been increasing steadily despite the price decreasing. It's an anomaly on Bitrefill's platform. It's an anomaly on BitPay, and all of these CEOs of these companies were really confused, but it wasn't surprising at all to me. I've been around a long time, and my fundamental thesis in 2017 was that eventually you'd get to a point in Bitcoin fee levels where it couldn't handle these low value transactions. And so despite having Lightning Network, credit layers, I thought the path of least resistance for the market with the most minimal trade-offs would be to use a chain that's exactly like Bitcoin but doesn't compete in hash rate, right? So it's still secure.
Which is amazing.
Which is what I primarily thought in 2017. And I created this account in 2021 to talk about that because I finally saw evidence of it happening. And you had the data to support it. So now we're just at like a total 180 flip in terms of speculative demand versus organic demand. And that, if you do look at the data as to what's actually transpired, that's what's happened, right? Litecoin's has been monetized. I think transactions are up 100x since 2017, and they don't really decline daily. You just see this steady linear growth. So yeah, I was kind of all over the place, but basically what I'm saying is you have this huge potential for Litecoin to get renewed speculative interest, because I think everyone who bought it for speculative reasons and didn't understand it has sold out or chased other coins that pumped. You only have like a core small group of people holding it that understand it, and then transactors on the network that actually need it. And given the amount of capital that's going to rotate in the space, and the potential narrative shift from, okay, Bitcoin's way too expensive, the market kind of looking in hindsight back at this data and saying, oh, yeah, maybe you will have multiple Bitcoin chains monetized. You could see a real rotation out of Bitcoin to Litecoin on that narrative, because the narrative eventually should match reality, right? Like, people will eventually figure it out, given enough time. And then speculators bring that future forward by pricing it in, right? Everyone's looking out into the future and trying to guess what happens. And so my thinking is that Litecoin price should appreciate dramatically if the market kind of coalesces around this idea.
So possibly a more explosive move than 2017, because if I'm understanding you, 2017 was more of a speculative run. Now we have speculation. We still have the capacity to speculate on Litecoin. Some will do it, but we also have tons of fundamentals and genuine use case. Despite that will dwarf even the speculation. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically. And under my assumption, if Bitcoin fee levels approach $100 or higher, you're going to see, given Bitcoin's transaction distribution, potentially $1 billion or multiple $1 billion of economic loss from the chain, and it's most likely to migrate to Litecoin. Now, $1 billion doesn't sound like much, but generally these chains are moving around 1% of their market cap a day. So if you multiply 1 or 2 billion times 100, that's like 100+ billion increase in market capitalization. Litecoin's at 5 billion now, or 6 billion. So that's a pretty dramatic increase. And then, people chase what goes up the most. So
yeah,
the narrative should kind of follow price, right? As price is going up, you get these narratives that reinforces price going up, more people buying in. We see it in crypto all the time. I think it's going to make sense to people with Litecoin here in the coming few months.
Yeah, that's interesting. Where would you, if you could pick a number? I mean, we're looking at Litecoin earning a comma, I think, easily. What would be the upper end of where you may think that this might land if all of this lines up?
Well, the way I would think about it is to put it in context to where we're at from a macro perspective first. I think this is one of the most historic rallies in equities in the U.S., at least history, in terms of percentage gains, despite how bearish people were 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it's dramatically surpassed most people's expectations already, and I think they still will head higher from here. Given that, and that there's so much money that can move into crypto, assuming it catches global attention, I think most people's price targets are going to be really too low, because you should see more capital rotation now in 2024 than you saw in 2017. I think 2021 was kind of an anomaly for crypto cycles. We didn't really see a true parabolic blow off top.
It was,
but weird. I think we will see that this time. And then assuming that part is correct, like the macro assumption of a kind of a historic run, and then crypto having its maybe most intense bubble ever, then also assuming Bitcoin fees are at the level and the psychology around Litecoin changes, it's very possible that speculators take this to like 0.1 BTC in price. So, right, if you had a 150K Bitcoin price, you'd arrive at a $15,000 Litecoin price. That sounds insane given where we're at now, but there's almost zero speculative interest in this chain. And I'm saying speculation will go from, oh, this is useless to, oh, this is the second Bitcoin, right? People have that in their mind, like, oh, this is the second opportunity I can get Bitcoin. It should be priced at 0.25. You can really see movement, and given how illiquid the Litecoin supply is right now because of this extended consolidation, the move will be very violent. It doesn't take much money to move Litecoin to 25% of Bitcoin's market cap. I think it takes less than it will take to move Bitcoin to like 200K or 150K even. So that's some context for you. I would say, I don't know if that's going to happen. It depends on momentum.
For sure.
Conservatively, like 0.025, which would be like 2,500 to 4,000, depending on Bitcoin's price. But yeah, somewhere there. I'd say like 3 to 15 to even slightly higher. If these markets can move 100% in a day, you know, like towards the extreme bubble euphoria type top.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember 2017, it was wild. So if we have the capacity to go beyond that, I mean, it'll be quite a time to be alive. I'll just say that.
Yeah, we went from like
to be observing
to 20K the next week or something in Bitcoin price. And that was when there was no ETFs. There were no like real serious investors looking at Bitcoin. And now that's definitely shifted. So you just have way bigger pools of capital there. And if they're not going to buy Bitcoin, what are they going to buy?
Yeah, there's typically the 4 chosen ones, right? 3 definitely, sometimes 4. Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, and then often Bitcoin Cash as well. But the thing about Bitcoin Cash is it is an adversarial chain, seeing that they share the algorithm. Not that they pose a real threat to BTC. I don't really think that's the case. But there's still kind of that, speaking of narratives, kind of that divisiveness kind of embedded in that. But and again, the genius of Litecoin being set up from day one on an alternate algorithm is amazing. So I think it was very wise. Well, that is good stuff. It is extremely interesting. Let's talk about miners' reserves. There's statements that basically miners, in terms of Litecoin mining, their reserves are at all-time lows. This is according, I think, to TradingView's statistics. And to be honest, when I reviewed their page, which I'll link to it to the show notes, the link to that, they don't really tell you how that's aggregated. So I imagine it's from pools, but I can't imagine that's actually accurate because I don't know how they get the data.
It comes from Into the Block, which is a data provider. So like TradingView, if you type it in on TradingView, you'll find the source. So sometimes they'll list other on-chain data providers' stats. So I know you can look at like coin metrics, like transaction count for each blockchain through TradingView. I think it's just TradingView pulls the data directly from them. But yeah, the miner reserve stats come from Into the Block, and I've been on their site quite a bit. They do show each pool's holdings for all these different miners. And it could be slightly off, but I think it's the Into the Block statistics kind of match what we've seen with price action too. So I think it's relatively accurate. It could be off. I could be missing something there, but if you look at the miner reserve stats through previous cycles, you can definitely notice that they kind of decline as Bitcoin's topping out. So they're kind of putting in the top, as well as the long-term older stats that you can also see on TradingView from various data providers. So again, yeah, it could be slightly off, but I tend to think it makes sense because according to the stats, miner reserves dumped really heavily since 2021. They dumped the most heavily every time Litecoin reached $100 over the last 2 years. So we struggled at $100 a lot, even though there was quite a bit of positive sentiment in late 2022 when Litecoin broke out against the rest of the market. But you had millions and millions of coins sold by miners that prevented price from rallying. Mm-hmm. And so if that stat is accurate and you do have the largest seller out of the market, if price starts to break up through these resistance levels again, it should move very, very quickly, especially considering where we're at in the cycle and there's just way more money entering the space. So that's why I think Litecoin has, if those stats are accurate, a decent chance of rising quicker than other coins that are been hyped and are running into major distribution tops. If Litecoin catches relative attention when the most money is entering the space, it's definitely a good setup to have.
Yeah, they don't have any liquidity to offset demand. If indeed these stats are correct and there's very low reserve. And that might also change too if miners have the incentive to hold. Because I think with Bitcoin, again, I haven't looked up their stats, but I think Bitcoin miners have held a lot longer. Is that correct?
It is correct. They own about like 10 or 11% of the circulating supply right now versus Litecoin's like 2.5% and Dogecoin's like 6-7%.
Yeah, so there's way more downside pressure from the miner side on Bitcoin than there is with Litecoin now, because it seems like what was liquidated except for this 2.5% and whatever is newly generated, depending on halving cycles and hash power and all that stuff. I still think it would be challenging to have it specifically known, because again, you're going to have miners, they're going to get paid out. Those are all in individual addresses. You'd have to track all them. So that's why I have a little bit of a problem with that metric. But if we're going to take it as correct, again, they're not going to be able to supply the demand, which should allow the price to go up much more rapidly should there be, increased interest in Litecoin. And we're already seeing that build up.
Yeah, I think another important distinction to make too is that it's more bullish to see large sell-offs at the lows. In like market sense, you would call that absorption versus large amount of sell pressure at the highs. That's distribution. If you have all this absorption at the lows, it's indicative of accumulation, and these are generally stronger hands that aren't going to sell. So like miners, they mine every day. They're taking profits. They're waiting for certain price levels to exit. Whereas, some of these long-term holders who have deep conviction aren't going to be supplying coins onto the market until their price levels are met. And so for someone like me, if this price starts moving vertically really fast, I'm not going to be selling. It's more of a time frame thing. And I think a lot of Litecoin holders will feel the same way, right? If they see price rally a ton and they think the cycle's not complete, are they going to sell? No, what happens in vertical price moves is nobody's selling, and it creates FOMO, and price can just keep climbing higher and higher than people imagine.
That's interesting. And I think even with miners, they could decide to hold Litecoin, and they could change their mind. They could decide to say, hey, we're not going to, even if they had it, they may not release it based upon what they're seeing or where this market could go. So you can go different directions with that. I think with S-CRYPT mining, it's interesting because you're getting Bells, you're getting Doge, and you're getting Litecoin with the same amount of work, right? And I think people might remember that the supply of Litecoin ultimately is 84 million when Doge and Bells, Doge is the most anti-inflationary, but still inflationary. I mean, 84, what are we at? I think where are we at? I remember looking this
70 some million. I don't.
Right. We're almost at 80 million now, I think. Are we at 79 million?
I'm not 100% sure. We could check that real quick.
Yeah, I don't have my screen up, but there's something around that. We're getting close. I mean, and you might want to remember that when you're mining assets. And Bells has done very well. I think Bells is neat. We had Adam McBride on the show on episode 20. Of course, we're friends with Doge, but if we're looking at it, we're looking at scarcer, most scarce, right? Litecoin being the most scarce. And I think that could be a cause for it. Oh, by the way, there's not many of these left. And by the way, we still have every 4 years. And, so that could also really be like an aha moment, like, oh, by the way, maybe we should keep the Litecoin. I don't tell miners what to do. But I think it's really interesting because only one of the three assets you're mining is ultimately capped, and it's Litecoin.
For sure. Yeah. And I think there's 2 points to make there. Miners are just like speculators. They're just buying through mining instead of buying through an exchange, right? And so sometimes we like to think miners are like the smartest people in this market because early big miners like Bitmain did kind of work with people to promote Bitcoin pump and they sold the top. But if you look at a lot of people mining through these mining pools. They're just individuals trying to get access to coins, and they feel like they can get a discount if they do it through mining rather than buying on an exchange.
Which is true, depending.
Yeah. So that's an important point to make. I forgot my second point, actually, now that...
All good. We're on the same page. We leveled the playing field. Well, I think it's good. I think mining is an interesting part of this, and we'll see if things change there. But as of now, not a lot of reserves. So again, if there is demand, miners aren't going to be the ones that are going to meet that need. So maybe that's my next question is Litecoin successfully diffused with multiple holders, or we're looking at whales holding all this? I saw that tweet earlier today where the guy was like, no, there's like 100 accounts or whatever that control the whole supply. And I think they're exchanges. But where is Litecoin? How has it been distributed? Do you think it's... Go on that.
It's not as heavily concentrated as that guy is trying to make it out to be, which is... It's ironic for him to say that, because I know he's been talking about Solana a lot and a lot of these other coins that were very heavily... Pretty sure Solana was distributed. Did it have an ICO, or it's like a VC coin? I don't think it was like a fair launch type of chain. And a lot of these others that he's been promoting, and all the meme coins too, vast majority are heavily locked up by whoever founded it with a huge pre-mine. And that's why they pump so hard, is because they get a few small people to buy in, which pushes the price. But as far as Litecoin's distribution goes, no, I mean, this is the most globally adopted asset besides Bitcoin, maybe even very similar, right? If you look at user distribution among the world, from Bitrefill thinks of itself as like the largest merchant processor worldwide, because they operate in so many different countries. And if you look at payment volume with Litecoin on their platform, it's pretty evenly distributed across all these regions that they operate in the entire world. So it's hard for me to believe that it's concentrated in a few people, because it's been around for 13 years. Anyone had a chance to buy it. So even if it is concentrated, they had to go on the open market or mine it at a fair price. Like, everyone in this crypto market is speculating. It's a zero-sum game in the speculative sense, right? That if you're making a profit and selling, you're selling it to someone at a higher price that you bought it. That is sort of zero sum, right? Like, there is some fundamental demand, and I think Litecoin is extremely valuable, but in the speculative casino, everyone's dumping on each other. So I don't get why he would even make that statement. One, it's wrong, and two, you're doing the same thing, and so is everyone pumping Bitcoin and pumping any other chain, right? So it's laughable to me.
Well, a lot of this is laughable. Let's go back to narrative. It seems everybody wants a narrative right now, okay? I'm personally convinced about Litecoin's narrative and the strength of it, right? You may be able to even say that Litecoin has multiple narratives, okay? Silver to Bitcoin's gold, cryptocurrency for payments, which we're kind of talking about here. Those were the original ones. They've already been realized. Now we have, basically the largest cap privacy coin that nobody knows about. That's what I like to call it, because of MWeb. No, it doesn't mean everything's pegged into MWeb, but Litecoin is the largest cap crypto that has the capacity for on-chain privacy. So I think that's huge. That's a narrative. And then we go kind of over the summer with the gentleman from Coinbase. I don't remember who he was. He was at the summit, and he was basically saying, this was in the context of ETFs, right? It was before Canary came out. And he's like, no, Litecoin doesn't have a narrative. There's a narrative problem. And basically he dismissed the idea. Yet now we have Canary Capital just a few weeks ago introducing a Litecoin ETF, filing for one. Hasn't been approved yet. I suspect it will be. I also suspect that they're not going to be the only one filing for ETFs. And, so this idea of a narrative, I think we do have a narrative. I think we are responsible for saying what that narrative is, okay, as a community. But I also think that these folks that might be interested in Litecoin for what it is, its reliability, its digital commodity status, et cetera, its track record of 13 plus years now, we know they're going to start creating narratives when it suits them. So I kind of think I can dismiss that statement. I personally do, and I don't take it too seriously. And again, we've seen Canary Capital put their filing in just the other week. So what's your take on that? Are narratives really super important? Is it Is it something that we need to be overly concerned with? What's your take on the Litecoin narrative? I know I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth right now, but let's talk about narratives. What is the Litecoin narrative? Do we need to do anything about it? Will it realize itself? Is this sort of chasing something that's really not too important? What's your idea here?
Yeah, my idea again is that narratives follow price, so they're kind of lagging indicators. I would agree with you that Litecoin already has all of these narratives. You could even compare it to like Bitcoin in early days, right? What was the narrative when Bitcoin was $10?
Money.
Yeah, it was a money, but the broader market, at least if the outsiders looking in, thought it was like some useless tech like thing, and it's never going to succeed. So like the broader psychology around most people, if you ask them about Bitcoin, either didn't hear of it or didn't understand the value prop at all. I think that's similar to Litecoin. I would say Litecoin doesn't have a narrative problem. It doesn't have a price problem. It's just the market has a misunderstanding problem. I think the market's very offsides and doesn't understand it. And it makes sense because you've had so many Bitcoin podcasters, influencers, people like Michael Saylor promoting Bitcoin as the infinitely scalable world gold that will dominate everything else. And so that's reinforced by Bitcoin price going up because people buy into it and it becomes this momentum-based trade. So it's hard because Bitcoin's overshadowing Litecoin and nobody's looking at the actual on-chain data. They're just listening to podcasts and buying it and then thinking they're right after price goes up. So I would say Litecoin has, it's just misunderstood. And, but what you talked about with these multiple narratives coming up, yeah, you have the high hash rate, network security, high levels of adoption. So money is the narrative, right? It's the same as Bitcoin, censorship resistant, inflation resistant money. So everything that applies to Bitcoin also applies to Litecoin. The market just doesn't understand why you need it. And then
Absolutely.
on the speculative side of things, yeah, you have institutional capital from an ETF filing, and I'm sure you'll get multiple more if price goes up enough because there will be demand. Such that you might see Fidelity and BlackRock. So you do have the same speculative type of demand narrative that Bitcoin had early on in this bull market trend, right? The rally that drove us from 30 to 70K, I think, at least from a psychological perspective, a lot of people were like, oh,
we're waiting for the ETFs. Yeah, that was a big deal.
They were front running that. So it's a huge deal. Well, now Litecoin has all of those narratives too. And then it also has privacy. So you could say it's like a private Bitcoin chain. I know the privacy is not perfect, but at least it can compete for some of the sector of the market that needs or wants or demands privacy. So you have this list of things, right? The DeFi stuff around Litecoin, the privacy chain that's getting adoption, the money side of things where it's exactly equal to Bitcoin, and then you have the speculative capital from institutions potentially through these ETFs. So you have everything Bitcoin has basically, plus an additional few things. And those will all come into play as if and when price increases and if and when Bitcoin reaches this monetization limit. So I know I'm extremely biased, but I think all those narratives exist. It doesn't have a story problem. It's just being overshadowed, and the speculative money is all focusing in the other direction.
Well, you're convicted, and that's clear, and you have reason to base your conviction. And I think you're correct. It is. I mean, it's funny. I'm wearing this shirt, by the way. You can grab it at the Litecoin Foundation. They still have it. It was an April Fool's joke a few years ago, but it is Bitcoin-like. That is what Litecoin is. And this whole idea of the perfect substitute, that it is Bitcoin, faster, cheaper, doesn't mean our fees will not go up, that they're going to be low for all time. But we can scale a little bit better, and we may be more nimble as a community to really face those questions should we have full blocks in perpetuity to see what we can do to scale. But it is a money. I think Bitcoin was created to be a money. It was initially championed as a money, which is why nobody believed it would work, because of course we have global currencies, US dollar, everything else, which we still have all of that. But the initial concept was to use this as money, and that it was a money. That's what came first, and then the appreciation came after that. And I think we're seeing very similar things with Litecoin. In fact, we're overshadowing Bitcoin in every way in terms of the monetary aspect of this, at least in terms of person-to-person exchanges, right? Which I think with these strategic reserves and that is becoming, I'll say, the elitification of Bitcoin, that's not the person-to-person digital electronic cash is not going to be, it's not going to be a fact. It already almost isn't. You can still use Bitcoin as money. I mentioned I don't have Bitcoin anymore, or at least any significant amount. But I used it as money, let's say back in August. It worked. It was tedious, but it worked. It was secure. It went through. Everything was good. But that's going to be further and further away from the user experience, especially as these numbers continue to go up and if the chain is congested. So Bitcoin on purpose is departing from person-to-person electronic cash, right? Litecoin is realizing that in real time. We have metrics from Bitrefill, BitPay. I'm sure there's other metrics out there that you don't know about. But it is, so I'm seeing, again, am I making myself clear? I'm seeing the parallel of Litecoin and what Bitcoin was, and that is what Litecoin is. I'm not diminishing Bitcoin. I'm personally not interested in it anymore because, again, I don't want to really deal with an elite currency. And I think that's what it's becoming. I think it's something that's going to be hoarded. Let's talk about the strategic reserve. If these things are set up, how much liquidity will be trapped in those? What's that going to do to the market? Of course, if there's barely any of it circulating, I'd imagine it would go up in terms of NGU. But what are we looking at with fees? What are we looking at in terms of blocks being filled? Are people using it on layer one? Can you elaborate on that if you can?
Yeah, I don't know. I assume they're just going to lock it up. I think the plan was to, if it actually goes through, was to buy X amount every, over a certain frequency or certain time period, kind of like dollar cost averaging, and then just hold it in a reserve under the assumption it would go up, and it would help the U.S. government financially. I don't know if it wouldn't really increase on-chain transactions much. It wouldn't really affect the fee market. I think, it would just hoard more of the supply. Like I said before, I think speculation nets out in the long term, and I think it's really about how much demand there actually is for the money. So, if they actually do this, I think the U.S. government will buy the top, and they'll actually, have to tax people more to offset their losses because they use taxpayer money in the first place to buy it. And they're just going to have this loss. I don't think it's going to spur more governments to adopt it or speculate because they're not really adopting it. They're not like using it in trade. They're just speculating on it, like El Salvador's doing, or like Michael Saylor's doing with his company. There's interesting parallels too. It's like El Salvador was like, I wouldn't call it a failing country, but it needed something to revitalize itself. MicroStrategy's company he's admitted was basically failing, and it was kind of like a Hail Mary bet. So the risk reward made sense to that smaller country and that small tech company that was getting out competed by bigger tech companies. But for the U.S. government to do it, maybe it's the same thing, right? You have this huge debt problem, and it's like a Hail Mary bet, but I think it's a really bad risk reward bet. To think Bitcoin price can appreciate from 100K plus to much higher, right? It's already $2-3 trillion market. And then to assume other countries that are non-friendly with the US will just adopt it and want to buy the US government's bags and bail them out of their debt. That seems silly. I think it's more likely they buy the top if they actually do this and they end up with losses and have to, tax to offset this.
Did you ever think that this could be a form of capturing Bitcoin and specifically removing it from individual kind of possession?
Yeah, it's possible, like what they did with gold. I think there's two ways this plays out. Either they speculate, take losses, or they, try to like really promote Bitcoin as this great money, and everyone owns it on these custodians that are within the government's political control. And then they issue paper dollar or new form of money on top of Bitcoin, say it's got to be backed 1-to-1 with Bitcoin. But then you can't audit the supply. You don't even know if they're inflating it. Just like they did with gold, eventually the market calls them and they can't make do on their 1-to-1 promises. And and then ban it and say you can't trade it. You have to use these dollars. So yeah, it's possible that could arise with Bitcoin, just like it happened with gold before. But I don't think the government really has any use for this money, because essentially its value prop is for individuals to avoid censorship and inflation from governments that are imposing it on them, not for governments to use it. The government
with each other, yeah.
Yeah, governments benefit so much from monopolizing the control over money. That's what they do. They have a monopoly over production through counterfeit laws, and they have great power from it. They've been able to finance higher and higher deficits, debt, led to way more power than the government's ever had in history because of this ability to manipulate interest rates and the money supply. So giving that up, essentially would reduce their power. And even though Trump and Elon and these guys are saying they're going to do these things, make the government more efficient, I think they believe that, but I don't know. I just, this like organism of the government is, I think, pretty strong, and people tend to vote for more free stuff or more benefits. They don't want to see this going away. So I think it's going to be there's going to be a big fight if they start trying to really, cut entitlement spending and all these things. I don't think Bitcoin changes anything about the financial state of the U.S.
So you don't think it's going to make the U.S. government more fiscally responsible?
I don't. Bitcoin won't do anything about that, but I question whether Elon and these guys can have enough influence over elected officials to really curtail government spending. I mean, Trump's last term in office, it definitely increased spending, and
started with COVID especially.
Yeah. If he's going to offer these tax cuts, which I think will get passed because he has control of the Senate and the House, you're going to have to decrease spending way, way more to be able to pay for those tax cuts. So I think the most logical path is just higher inflation, higher debt monetization.
You think lower interest rates?
They'll try to, I think lower interest rates. I think they'll try to force them lower. At some point, they lose control of them because people, no matter how much they inflate or mess with and manipulate the government inflation statistics, eventually people figure it out, and bondholders don't want to be, compensated at such low interest rates. So they won't buy the government debt anymore. They'll sell it until interest rates match inflation. And then you're just funding yourself with the money printer, which eventually leads to really bad economic problems, like a super high inflation, like what we've seen happen with other failing countries around the world. I don't know if it's going to get to that point, but I'm not as optimistic about change as most people are, even though I lean on that side, just skeptical.
I think it's interesting with, so I think probably it will be lower interest rates. It will continue to be inflationary, which in the short term feels great. In the long term, you're just kicking the can down the road. It's getting worse. Now, I did see some ideas of getting Ron Paul to consult the Department of Government Efficiency, and I think there was some talk of Vance discussing the Fed. So we do have some interesting conversations. Now, whether they're just kind of throwing a bone out to people who are watching, viewers, listeners, supporters, or if they're serious about it, I don't know. More will be revealed. I know we haven't even audited the Federal Reserve successfully, let alone just, shut their doors. And I know Powell was even balking at the idea of him being asked to step down, I want to say, in a recent interview. So a lot of moving parts, and I don't want to be a pessimist. I think there's good reason to be, but I'll try to say maybe there's some good things too. Again, more will be revealed. We have no idea. This is certainly a speculative conversation in terms of this immediate context here. But I did think it's interesting, and I don't know how they're going to do it, but Trump kept on saying about lowering the cost of energy, lowering the cost of energy, lowering the cost of energy. Of course, that could go in hand with him wanting to, quote, make Bitcoin in America. And I mean, if you're lowering the price of electricity, I mean, that would be a real boon to miners for sure. By the way, it's going to benefit S-CRYPT miners too. I mean, that would be super. But again, I don't know what has to be expended, relinquished, or compromised to allow for that to happen. So again, we don't really know. we get talking points.
Yeah, I don't know why people look up to the government to do these things. Like, they can remove regulations and restrictions to allow people to be productive, but they can't do anything they don't produce energy themselves. They're not going to go out and do that. And I don't know if the American population wants to do that like everyone believes. I don't see it in a lot of the social circles that I interact with in real life. I think I see it in other countries more so than America, especially in the city environments. I don't know. I think people are complacent. Maybe there's some technological innovation in like nuclear power or something else that lowers the cost of energy, but I don't know. We'll see, I guess. I don't want to be pessimistic. I hope that we reverse course, and at least they're talking about all these major issues, and Elon's at least saying like the basic facts about, hey, like every dollar taxed is a dollar spent, but for every dollar the government spends is a dollar taxed, right? Regardless if it comes through direct taxes,
or the Fed,
debt, or the Fed, inflation. At least he's getting the public to kind of understand these core problems, so maybe they can, face the economic reality and pain with a sense of understanding, and we can correct, because you got to understand the problem before you can correct it. Otherwise, you're vulnerable to propaganda and government blaming it on like corporate price gouging or banks, like the big banks or whatever. They blame everyone but themselves. So if we understand the problem, like as a greater populace, I have more hope that we'll be able to fix it. It's not going to be, the problem is it's going to be painful regardless, whether you kick the can down the road and inflate this away, or you decrease government spending dramatically and tell people, hey, you got to go back to work. Nobody wants to pay for it. That's the problem. I think even the Bitcoiners, they just want the strategic reserve so they can sell at a high price and then retire. That everyone doesn't want to work. That's the problem. I think in America.
I think that's a fair statement. And even if we talk about Litecoin or Bitcoin or these cryptocurrencies, it's proof of work. Work is the value. Work is why it's different. Work is why we, proof of stake and proof of work, very different animals, right? Creating a token out of thin air, very different. That's the Federal Reserve, right? In crypto form. So work is you cannot have anything without work. So yeah, I think society needs to be willing to do the work, and we'll leave it at that. Interesting statements. Initially, again, we wanted to talk about 2017 versus 2024. Do you want to end with that? Maybe unpack that further, go into something we haven't discussed. What did I miss? I'll kind of open the floor to you.
Okay. Yeah, I guess we could just summarize. I think the technical structure in like price action from 2017 is very similar to where we're at right now. And I would say it's most likely the last half of 2024. So like the last 6 months is where we're at today. And, on the fundamental side, I think for Litecoin specifically, we're at the complete opposite of where we were at in 2017. Wow, we saw a 100x price increase on the back of primarily speculation. This time, we have a clear fundamental demand catalyst and huge 100x increase in actual adoption of the network for its intended purpose, with zero speculative interest. So, assuming this bull market continues and we have this parabolic rise that I've been expecting for a long time, then Litecoin has a really good chance to lead and catch a lot of that speculation, leading to narrative change and like a crazy price rally. I guess that's kind of summarizing the thing. I think the technical analysis is most similar to XRP in 2017. Comparing Litecoin price action of the last 2 years or 3 years of this extended consolidation is very similar to XRP and not very similar to the Litecoin price action part of the 2017 bull run. And XRP increased like 900x in 2017 from that point, and Litecoin only went up 100x. I think Litecoin's going to dramatically outperform XRP over the coming 4, 5, 6 months.
Good deal. Thank you, sir. Where can we find you?
So I have this YouTube channel. It's called the Litecoin Forecast. I uploaded a few videos like 2 years ago, and then recently started making content, educational stuff. So if you want to have like a share with your friends or family of like basic understanding of the Litecoin story and why you would need a second Bitcoin chain, you can refer to those educational videos. And then I'm on X at WLitecoin. Those are the only two places that I really exist online.
Well, very good, sir. I think you made some good cases this evening. Any final words to leave the show tonight?
Yeah, I guess I would say that, if you're still around in the Litecoin community, I appreciate, you holding on all this time, the conviction, I believe will eventually be rewarded. I wouldn't, question yourself too much if you've been around this long. Don't get caught off guard by other coins pumping. Just the best way to kind of trade these cycles is to develop a position and let it play out. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on, and thanks for the time.
Absolutely. Folks, why Litecoin? Follow him at WLitecoin on X. Check out his videos. I know he's been doing more TA stuff in terms of live streams. I can just say personally, he's a great individual on air and off. And I can say personally, sir, I hope to see you at a summit down the road. And until we talk again or interact where we interact, thank you for coming on. Have a great evening. And everybody else, thank you for tuning in.